Welcome to the Write Good Books podcast, the audio companion to WriteGoodBooks.com, with your host Jason Bougger.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jason. I'm here with our co-host Scott Michael Childers. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing fine. Hey, I'm doing really well today because I didn't have to prep. Today I'm going to be picking Jason's brains on the topic of short stories.
I hope you have a very small spoon.
No, but I do have a short list of questions. Well, let's just start out with, could you give us a definition on what is a short story?
Oh, short story. Good question. I consider a short story anything from about 1,000 words to maybe 7,500, maybe 10,000. Anything longer than that starts getting into novella or novelette territory, and anything under 1,000 ends up being flash fiction, which is a different type of short story. So we consider short stories pretty much between 1,000 and 7,500 words, and it varies on the publication. On my easy and theme of absence, I only accept up to 3,000 words just because I like to keep them a little bit shorter, but I'd say your standard is 7,500.
Okay. So let's talk about submission guidelines. We'll just start out with that. If you have written one, where does it go? How do you send it off?
Your very first step is make sure it's done. It's finished, it's polished, it's publishable. You don't want to send an early draft because it'll just get rejected outright if the writing isn't up to par. When you're ready to submit, and as a side note, I think even if you want to write novels, I think it's a great idea to work on short stories and try to build a little bit of a publishing list. It'll just help you in the long run. And it's fun to write short stories. So, with that tangent out of the way.
Well, and there's many novel authors that will write short stories because the story they want to tell
is short.
It fits a short story format more than a full novel. So,
right.
Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, me too. The first thing to do is find a place to submit to, and there are so many ways to do that. I personally use duotrope.com, it's a pay site. It's $50 a year, which isn't much, and it's got a full market listing where you can search by genre, you can search by pay scale, you can search by length of story, and you don't have to use Duotrope. There's other sources too, but when you find a market you want to submit to, look at their guidelines, and they're going to have specific guidelines. They're going to say, here's the word count we want, and they'll give you a range, and they'll say, here's the genres we accept, and then they're going to have other guidelines, such as it can't be previously published, and you can only be submitting to that publication.
So are there times where you can submit the same story simultaneously?
Yes, and markets who accept that will say it in their guidelines. They might say no simultaneous submissions. So if that's it, they want your story, and while they're reading your story, they don't want anyone else reading your story.
And so you should just wait on resubmitting that elsewhere until you hear back a definite, yes, we want it, no, we don't. Okay.
And in that case, it's okay to query if you don't hear back after a couple months. It's also important to look at what type of stories they publish.
Is that something
Make sure yours fits.
Is that something that would be in the guidelines, or is it more like look at their publications?
Oh, I mean, actually read a couple of stories. Make sure you can tell what kind of tone they take. Like if you look at my easy and theme of absence, for example, you'll see I don't generally take second-person present tense stories or something like that, for example. You can get a good sense of the type of story they publish. Especially if you're going to send to a more high-profile magazine like Asimov's or something, pick up a couple of issues and read them cover to cover. You'll know after you've read a handful of stories whether or not your story would fit.
So it's not just genre, it's also writing style.
Yes.
If your style doesn't fit, no matter if it's in that same genre, you may not want to.
Right. To go back to Asimov's, Asimov's will accept a larger range of fiction, as long as it's science fiction, where their counterpart Analog wants more hard science fiction, where Asimov's will want more, possibly space opera type, a little more laid back.
Okay. Now, when you're submitting, are you submitting the full story, or are you sending I'm assuming because they are short stories, that's not that big of a deal. Like in a novel, sometimes they don't want the whole novel. They want synopsis or abstract or first chapter.
It'll be in the guidelines, but for the most part, they want to see the whole story. Most publishers don't want you to send them a synopsis because it is a short story, and their editors will read through the whole thing. Every now and then, they might have some guidelines, say query for reprints or something like that. And I should probably define reprint.
Yes, please.
A reprint is a story that has been published elsewhere, and publications will say whether or not they accept reprints. If they don't say they don't accept reprints, then don't send them a previously published story. Some might say query for a reprint. Some will pay less for a reprint or not at all. Some might say they accept reprints sometimes, or they'll only solicit reprints. I've had a few publishers come back to me with my own short stories saying, I really like this story, but we've already published one reprint this month, so we're not going to take it.
Oh, okay.
So that varies too.
All right. So what about payment? What can an author expect out of a short story? What's the short story market like?
There are several different types of pay scales, so I'll just briefly go over those.
Okay.
I'll go from low to high. There's non-paying markets, which will say exposure only. And these will be in all sorts of formats, sometimes online, sometimes they'll be anthologies, and some of them are magazines. And there's even some high-profile, non-paying magazines. So, sometimes you're going to want to submit to exposure only as long as they've got a big market share. Moving up from exposure only, there's royalty only, and those are generally going to be print anthologies where they'll profit share if, and more often than not, there might not be a profit at all, but they'll say in their contract how much of the royalties they share between the authors, and then they'll pay that quarterly or annually. It'll be in the contract. After that, there's token payers. Token payers are a base pay regardless of how long the story is. This is the type of e-zine I run with the theme of absence, where I pay $3 for flash and $5 for short stories. If you're looking to get started writing, I recommend you look for token payers because you'll have a little more quality submissions to compete against than you will from non-payers, and you'll know where your talent lies, how you compare to other writers, I suppose. And there are tons and tons of token-paying markets. I like to say that so that there are lots of places to submit to. You'll always find open markets. After token payer, then you start getting into word count payers, and semi-professional pay is usually a penny per word up to 5 cents per word.
So in the semi-professional pay range, are there quite a few out there?
There are. There's all sorts of quality ones, and some of them will be a penny per word, which, for a 3,000 word story, that's $30. That's a start, and they'll go up to 5 cents per word. Then you move up to the professional payment, and these are the important ones. If you can get published in a pro market, you can get accepted to, the Science Fiction Writers of America Guild, the Horror Writers of America. They'll usually require a professional sale.
So what's the market look like for those?
The market is great for those. And it's an easy market now. Years ago, it used to be you print off your manuscript, you mail it in with a self-addressed stamped envelope and hope you didn't waste your postage, hope you get a response. Now they've all finally, and I stress on the finally because it took fantasy and science fiction a long time to go down this route. But they now finally accept online submissions. And it never hurts to send a story off to a pro-paying market. Just don't expect a quick response. Don't expect a personal response. But if you get a personal response, you're on the right track.
So would you say that acceptance rates are probably proportional to the amount that the publication or the company will pay? The pro markets have a lower acceptance rates, and where the token or even the free ones have a higher, generally speaking.
Generally, yes. I've seen, to go into a little more detail, and you may have wanted, I've seen some markets on the exposure only rate with this acceptance rates as high as 90%. Generally, a token rate will be around 10%. Theme of absence is still pretty new, and I'm accepting about 1 out of 4 stories on that. Semi-pro, you can expect about a 5% acceptance rate, and then your more known professional markets, most of them are less than 1% on Duotrope, and Duotrope is just a small sample.
So it might be less than
Might be
that.
a lot less than 1%. I know I've seen markets say they get well over 2,000 submissions a month, so there's a lot of competition.
Now, I've heard for novels, sometimes it's best if you address your submission to a specific editor. Again, that's in the novel field. Do you think, or what's your feel for that in the short story market?
In short stories, I always recommend doing that if you can find it. You know, if it lists who their editor is on the site, address it to their editor. It'll show the slush pile reader that you've done your homework on the market. It'll at least do that much. And, you know, it might not help you get an acceptance, but it might help you get the first page read instead of the first couple of paragraphs. I know that on Theme of Absence, I like seeing a Dear Jason instead of a Dear Editor. Just because I know they're looking at the site.
And they have an idea who might be looking at it.
Yeah. And I can't stress this enough. You have to read the guidelines and follow them word for word, or you'll get turned down before they even read your novel.
So, for example, if someone, the guideline says, we want it as a PDF, you don't want to send them a Word doc.
Right.
Or if they have font size or margin count, or just like any other submissions, if you don't follow the guidelines, it doesn't get a look.
Yeah, and they'll usually be specific if they want it cut and pasted into an email, or if they want it in Word or RTF or PDF or whatever. Now, I wanted to say, if they don't say what format they want, Google standard manuscript format and put it in that format and send it in RTF. That'll at least show that you're courteous enough to try to use a standard format.
And one that pretty much anyone can open these days.
Right. Now, the one thing about standard manuscript is that it says use Courier. It seems like most people want Times New Roman. So that's the one place I'll break the rules. Unless they specifically say they want Courier, I'll use Times New Roman because it's easier on the eyes. And I've seen lots of publishers say that, so I don't feel bad bending that rule.
Okay. So after you submit, what type of is there a rough standard that people are going to have to wait to hear back, or does that depend on the market?
It depends on the market. There's no consistency whatsoever. A lot of places will give an auto response, though, but a lot of places won't.
So you may get we received your submission right away, but then a long time goes.
Yeah, you might not. And I think a lot of the markets they'll probably queue you and just read your story and the order comes in. A few will send a letter saying, we read this, we're not sure if we can use it yet, but it's good enough to hold on to for a little bit. They call that short list, so you're on their short list. Also, on their guidelines, a lot of publications will say, if you haven't heard from us in X amount of days, query us. And that's a simple, hey, I sent the story in on this date. I just wanted to confirm that you received it and check on its status.
So here's another question. Let's say it's been accepted, send a contract. What type of things are you looking for as the author in that type of contract?
Well, now that's a good question.
And that might not be one we actually use because we are over 15 minutes.
We're over 15. No, you're going to take that. Read the contract, because you never know. There might be some fine print. The contracts are generally going to say, we're accepting this story. It's going to want you to sign that you are the author, that you have not plagiarized it. It'll specify pay, if any. It'll specify a time frame of publication. And here's the important thing. Every contract I've ever signed has said, if the story is not published by this date, full rights are returned to you. And that is important. I've actually used that clause in one case where they said it would be published by a certain date, and that date came and went. It wasn't published, so I resubmitted the story elsewhere. I double-checked with the publisher to make sure. But I did want to talk real quick about query letters. We kind of brushed on it, but as far as the submission process, but I think most people don't really want a fancy query letter. They pretty much just want a cordial, hi, here's my name, here's my bio, just list a couple of your achievements, here's my story, here's its word count, I hope you can use it, thanks. You know.
So in this case, like in some novel queries, you actually put abstracts of the novel, but with a short story, your abstract will probably be just as, half as long as the story,
right,
so why?
Right.
Okay.
You might want to list a genre. Here's my science fiction story called Jason's Science Fiction Story. I hope you can use it. Thanks for your time. Real general. And never in a cover letter say anything like self-depreciating. Don't say, well, I hope you don't hate this. I don't feel like it's very good. They don't want to hear that. They want to know you're a professional. And they also don't want to know if your mom liked it or your sister liked it. Don't say anything like that. Just say, here's my story. If it's been previously published, mention that. And that's about it. We could go... Maybe we'll do another cast sometime about an actual submission process. But I hope these covered the basics. And... you have any other questions? Or
my only other question was going to be, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Okay, and I already did. So thanks for listening, and check us out on the web at www.writegoodbooks.com. See ya.
See ya.